Lisa, do the opening.
Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome. You're not hearing me?
We can hear you.
Yes.
Wonderful. So a very warm welcome. We're very happy to host you today here as Integrity Next and HealthProc Europe. Before we're starting off with our webinar on how to drive sustainability and achieve carbon neutral goals, a couple of housekeeping rules, and then we just get started. So as you and I assume, as everyone now is quite aware, since we have been on webinar sessions for a time, all attendees are on mute. And we would like you to make that an interactive session at the end of our webinar to post all your questions in the question chat box in the panel you can see from a attendee view. So please feel free to post your questions. We will answer these at the end of the webinar in our Q&A session. We will also record the webinar. So on Monday next week, we will share with you from Integrity Next the recording as well as a slide, so you can also look them through, share them with your peers, and have everything all together. So Dieter, over to you. And next slide.
Yeah, please. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Elisa, and a big thank you also to Simon, co-founder of Integrity Next, and thank you to Larissa. Larissa is acting in the background today and organize everything perfectly in advance. Yeah. Let's start with a quick introduction. Two big topics dominate the daily media landscape: Corona on the one side, on the other hand, the climate goals of the EU and of each individual state. Hopefully, Corona will certainly disappear in the near future. The achievement of the climate goals will accompany, and I'm pretty sure of that, each of you people, each of all the people participating here for the rest of their lives. Yeah. And while the other industry sectors, having long since taken up this issue, hospitals and healthcare, more or less once again, are lagging behind. Yeah. Yet this issue will soon gain enormous importance from the legislative side. We see recently in public tenders, sustainability issues will soon play a major role in the awarding of contracts. And it's not just about the carbon footprint of suppliers. It's also companies are facing a dramatically increasing awareness of all aspects of sustainability. Public pressure, international regulators are holding companies responsible, not only for their own actions, but also for their suppliers. Yeah? Keywords here are anti-bribery, anti-corruption, adherence of ethical standards with the production of goods, and so on and so on. Activities can be outsourced, responsible cannot. I'm very looking forward to hearing today from some absolute experts on these topics today. Of course, we can only briefly touch the topics today within the framework of this seminar. But as I said, this is also just the kickoff for us to publish this issue in the healthcare and hospital sector. Let's kick off with Andy Bladen. Andy is director of, by far, the largest healthcare ecosystem in the world, ECH Health Alliance. We are proud that we as HealthProc Europe be the first thematic healthcare ecosystem, procurement ecosystem at ECH Alliance. Okay, Andy.
Thank you for that, Dieter.
Go ahead.
Hope you can all hear me nice and clearly. Good morning, all of you. My name is Andy Bleeden, and I work for the European Connected Health Alliance. Sustainability and healthcare have been two large issues that have been key to the European Connected Health Alliance and our members for some years now. The European Connected Health Alliance are a large member organisation with around 800 members, most of which are public, not-for-profit government bodies, who are based across the globe, giving us access and connections to over 16,500 health professionals and experts. We ourselves are a not-for-profit body, and our role is to basically connect up those dots that are there between all those connections we have, all our member organizations, using a series of both geographic and thematic ecosystems. Never has that been more important than during the current pandemic. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to abandon our commitment to sustainable healthcare. Let's look at our next slide and I'll talk about our ecosystems a little bit more. The concept of ecosystems that we've created is now 10 years old, and I was lucky enough to join the first one. And the idea behind them is around simply a set of permanent multi-stakeholder gatherings, including all of those stakeholders you can see in front of you. All of them with patients and citizens at the centre. And we know with sustainability, that is central to many of our patients and citizens as a key priority. What we've done with our ecosystem network is to target the objectives of breaking down the silos that exist in health and social care, because they're as prevalent now as the day I started in healthcare in 1990. But also to not just have a talking shop, but actually do things. So they're there to transform healthcare delivery in many different ways, but also recognize that as a part of our largest spend, we need to grasp the opportunity of economic growth as well. The idea of our ecosystem network is to bring the best practice then from a multitude of ecosystems globally that have now joined us. I joined when I was in a network of one, which is quite a lonely place, but don't feel sorry for me because it didn't last long. Our network now, as you'll see on the next slide, has grown exponentially. So much so that in the last 2 years, our network's grown and doubled in size, but also the reach of it is gone beyond Europe. We've built strengthened those links across the Nordic regions, and we'll hear about some of those today, but also across the UK, outside of the mainland Europe, across into Australia and into Latin America and Canada, and more recently in India and Sri Lanka too. But many of those ecosystems we have that have joined us also have key targets around sustainability, key ambitions to maintain sustainable healthcare, because they know the impact of the largest spend is probably also going to be the impact of the largest polluter, the largest landfill site filler. So I've got a couple of examples I'd like to just touch on today, which are about two of our members, which I shall come to them in a moment. So the first one I'm going to tell you about is a great organisation that's based within the UK called NeedleSmart. They're one of our more recent members that have joined us. But they have a methodology, and this is very, very current. In fact, you couldn't get more current than this if you've just had a vaccination, because they manage their needle management in such a way that they can reduce the amount of landfill from sharps in bins. There's a sustainable, decrease in waste disposal, and that itself, as you can see, leads to less spend on journeys, on disposal journeys, on carbon footprint, but also to ideas of introducing alternative technologies. A great way of introducing via digital solution a way of reducing healthcare and our carbon footprint. What that means is almost, and I think it's one of the key standouts for the company, but this is a company that's frontlining the drive with vaccinations and the management of digital vaccinations. And this is a key component of it. So I'd encourage you, as a UK-based firm, and I know there's a lot of UK NHS firms here today, to look up and get involved. Many of you probably are already involved with them. I'll give you another example, because what our network also does, and you'll see on the next slide, is we contain other member organizations themselves that focus on sustainable healthcare. What a greater opportunity there is than that I can't give you, because we have member organizations themselves who are themselves umbrella organizations, as you can see here with the Nordic Centre for Sustainable Healthcare, based in Sweden. Fantastic organization. They have both private sector companies signed up to this that you can see in the logos on the left hand side, but more importantly, great big hospitals all over the Nordic regions, which give a cast iron guarantee around sustainable healthcare, not just in terms of waste, but in terms of water management, electricity, and also heating. So there's two fantastic examples from our network where our role, as I said at the beginning, is to connect up some dots. And hopefully, with the examples I've given you today, we can connect up the dots with yourselves and kick off what we think is a larger engagement around the whole field of sustainable healthcare. That's enough from me, because I'm just here to introduce a topic and also open the doors to a wider network for you to connect up with. I'm going to hand back to Elisa and Dieter for our next presentation, which is Jens.
Yes, Andy, thank you very much for this brief overview. And yeah, this underlying this important topic in your big network. Great. We jumping into the next. I'm very happy that our new member, the Median Clinics, Median Unternehmensgroup of Germany, represented by Jens Knoblich, Jens is Director of Services and member of the Management Board, will speak now. As far as I know, in terms of the number of clinics, this is the largest sustainability project in Germany, if not in Europe. Yeah. The message is coming out, the message coming out of this is very clear. The big players like Median have put this important topic on the agenda as a top priority. Median has only recently launched the project. Therefore, there's no concrete project experience yet, but the project plan is very ambitious. We are happy to hear now, Jens, please. Oh, we can't hear you. We can't hear you.
Thank you, Dieter. I'm very, very happy to be here. Basically, you said it all, so we can go on to the next speaker. No. Median Green, our corporate sustainability program. Maybe a few words before we dive into that to Median and who we are. Maybe on the next slide, yes. One further, thanks. So Dieter said it already, Median is the leading private rehabilitation provider in Germany with more than 120 clinics in Germany. We are at the top range regarding the outcome of our medical services, and we also want to keep it in that way. Median is very, very, very much focused on the medical outcome and the development, the further development of its medical expertise in its areas. Recently, our parent company, we are private equity owned by Waterland Private Equity, bought another group with an interesting portfolio in the UK, which we can see on the next slide, the Priory Group. Priory Group is also leading in its field in providing behavioral care in the UK. People from the UK might be familiar with the group, and together we really want to become the European leader in providing mental health and medical rehabilitative services. We have a few points regarding our joint vision in this on the next slide. While we are being at the top at each of our countries, we want to do this now not only in Germany and the UK, but all over Europe. And in doing so, we of course want to provide very, very strong inpatient services within the existing facilities, within the existing clinics and centers, but also digitalize our services so more outpatient services can be provided in each of the areas, and also there's a structured follow-up possible for all of our patients. This means, in the first place, bringing forward the quality, bringing forward the outcome to our patients. This, again, made us think not only the patient journey and bringing forward quality, but how can we interlink this with a corporate strategy regarding our sustainability. And therefore, on the next slide, we introduced, by the beginning of this year, our program very creatively called Median Green. Median Green was introduced in 2021, and it is supposed to interlink our medical expertise with a sustainable sourcing and responsibility strategy. And what I'm more interested in today is, on the next slide, I can show you what are the key bullet points. What we have planned so far is in discussing how you could bring a strategy alive, because we are very much convinced that it's not only a question of having a very nice top to bottom strategy on how to be sustainable in the various areas, and you see it here. We have measures taken in terms of direct emission. We are looking at supply chain. We are looking at the optimization continuously on site. In a couple of years, we also want to dive deeper in topics like fair labor, fair trade, which seem very, very complex to us at the moment. And of course, while doing so, we are continuously developing KPIs, and we also want to audit our program internally and externally, so we can actually prove that we have gone a step further from where we are today. What are my main questions today is, and maybe therefore is the next slide quite interesting to all of you. We have the strategy, we have it communicated around the management board, all the hospital directors, all the clinic leads, they are involved in it. But how do you make such a corporate sustainability strategy accessible to the people, and to the people that every day come to work in the clinics, in the centers, and how can they actually see that we are working on that? And that is leading me to the question, how can we measure something like sustainability on a day-to-day basis? So make it seeable, not only for our employees, but also for our patients, also for our visitors. And therefore, what are the main day-to-day activities that we should look at to really drive this? And also, what are effective measures? We've seen one just in the presentation before. Is it also an interesting one for Median? Does it apply to all of the hospitals? Do all employees engage in such a thing? And last but not least, what are the right KPIs? And I'm very, very excited about what we will hear next in the program and what the discussion will bring up later. So thank you.
Thank you, Jens. Very, thank you, Jens. Very impressive project plan, very ambitious, yeah. And as I said, you have only just started, and we are looking forward to hearing about your success stories, hopefully in the future, and of course also the pitfalls. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So we move on with the next three speakers. These guys are, from my point of view, one of the most profound procurement consultants in that field that I know. Yeah. James Circle knows procurement from almost every angle. With his recently founded supply chain community in the UK, he has created one of the largest network of its kind in the UK in a very, very short time. Yeah, he has also recently become our chapter lead at HealthProc Europe. This gives us a strong footprint in the UK, and of course we have reversed the Brexit by creating access to the continent for James and his community. Matt Oram is one important part of this network, and Matt has the best benchmark data prices ever in the UK and in the hospital sector and in other healthcare fields. Neil Hind is one who is practically implementing such project at the NHS. Okay, guys, we are very, very excited to hear from the field, from the machinery room of implementing such projects. Please kick off.
Thank you very much for that introduction. So I'm going to start, then I'm going to hand over to Matt, who's going to talk about some work we've been doing on single-use plastics, and then on to James, who's going to talk about how some of the change management is going on in the background. Just waiting for the slide to appear, which is going to appear any minute now, he says, very hopefully. While that slide is just coming back, so we've got about, I think on the agenda it says we've got about 15 minutes, but actually the organisers very kindly have given us a bit more time. So thank you for that. So what we're going to talk about, as I say, if we just go on to the next slide, what we're going to talk about, I'm just going to give a quick overview on the policy and how this has been implemented in the National Health Service in England, what those ambitions are. Then hand over to Matt, who's going to talk about some work he's been supporting us on in the Northwest. And then James is going to look at the call to action that's in place. How do we actually make this happen? How do we move away from this being lots of people talking about it and getting onto people actually making a difference on the front line? So moving on to the next slide, what are these ambitious targets? The ambition of NHS England really is to be the first carbon zero health system in the world, hoping to do that by the year 2040, which isn't that far away, with an 80% reduction by around 2032 on those carbon emissions that we can influence. NHS England is about 4% of the country's emissions, so quite a big player. We've had a focus on single-use plastics that we're going to hear a lot more about since about 2019. We focused on catering because that was quite an easy one to do, and we've done that in the main. But the NHS net zero carbon ambitions is really to look at a 10% reduction in single-use plastic in the short term. There is a five-year roadmap now published, so it gives us a step-by-step approach on how we're going to make those ambitious targets I've talked about. One of the issues we always find, and we've heard that already, is how do you benchmark? How do you know what your emissions are now? So how can you actually show you've made these improvements? And we're going to hear some more around that, looking at scope 1, scope 2, and the more challenging scope 3 emissions. How do we understand what those are in a hospital, and the wider NHS in GP surgeries and in dentists, all which are in scope. So what we looked at across the Northwest is the 26 NHS trusts, and for people who don't know the NHS setup, an NHS trust may be a number of sites and a number of hospitals. But we had a project working with Matt at Advising to identify single-use plastics. We actually, it's more difficult than you think. When you're looking at a list of products you bought, how do you know what is a single-use plastic item? How do you know if it's made out of plastic or paper or pulp? How do you know it's single-use or multi-use? Lots of work to identify what those items are. Then understand how are they used? Are there alternatives? You know, what are the CO2 impacts of if we change from buying one thing into another? It's not always as simple as you think. Sometimes you're just moving a problem somewhere else in the system. And then how can we influence those who are using these products to make that change and to support us in this journey? On the next slide, you're going to see one operation. So this is a cataract operation, one of the most common operations done across the world and in NHS England. over 100 single-use items using one cataract operation. We do about, NHS England does about 400,000 of these a year. So you start to scale that up. I think worldwide cataract operations is about now 10 or 11 million. So, you know, you're talking of a lot of single-use plastic just coming from one single operation. Moving on to the next slide, how does this fit in? Well, we've done, NHS England have done quite a lot of work on, you know, what are the carbon emissions of the NHS, and this chart shows it really, really well. There's things we can do, which, you know, all organisations run away with, what we can do with our energy supply, with our water, our travel, lots of work going on around anaesthesia gases, inhalers, where there's quite big emissions. But as you can see there on the right-hand side in the blue, the wider supply chain is where most of these emissions come from, and that's where we really, really need to focus over the next 18 years or so, which sounds a long time, but you know, we need to be making these savings now, year on year. So I'm going to hand over now to Matt, who's going to introduce himself and talk us through this work in a bit more detail.
Great, thank you, Neil. So good morning, everybody. My name is Matt Oram from Advising, one of the co-founders. Just to give you a bit of background to Advising, kind of Dieter did the high level around price benchmarking, but where we kind of focus is on helping organisations make sense of their spend data. We specialise in healthcare. My own background is 18 years working in and around procurement in healthcare. And as a business, we've got the largest UK-wide benchmarking and spend analytics service with over 140 hospitals covering, and that's NHS Trust, sorry, so there's a lot more hospitals behind the scenes. But that covers the whole of big parts of England, all of Wales, all of Northern Ireland, and a chunk of Scotland. So to give you an idea of scale, it's about 90 billion euros that we've got at line level detail, which is about 300 million rows of data. And what we try and do is we use our knowledge from our own experience of working with surgical teams, driving, reducing clinical variation, and working within procurement teams. We use technology, so a little bit of things like machine learning and artificial intelligence to try and pull out as much insight as we can from the data. And then we layer in additional classification, so you can start to make sense of it in a way. And that's where we start to touch on single-use plastics. So next slide, please. To give you an idea of the scale of the challenge, some of these numbers came from America, but the average bed in a hospital, the waste in total is about 13 kilos a day on average. And when you look at that waste, about 25% of it is plastic. And when you add that up, it adds up to over a ton of plastic waste per bed per year. So it's quite a large amount of waste. The next slide, please. And when you look at the areas as Neil's described with the cataract procedure, and you just look at the photo there of just a typical photo of a theatre, the amount of plastic is just very clear. And 30%, or almost a third of waste from a hospital does come from theatres, of which actually a lot of it is clinical waste. So when we start to talk about single-use plastics and alternatives, the challenge comes from the fact that a lot of this is clinical waste. So it was good when we were talking earlier, or Andy was mentioning earlier around the needles, looking at alternative ways of either reusing or disposing of. So we're not just throwing it all to landfill. Next slide, please. This is a personal thing that I spotted when I had a blood test fairly recently. Was in the past we used the reusable items on the left as a tourniquet, so we could get our blood vessels pumping so they could find it easy to take blood. Now we're using a lot of these devices on the right, which are single-use items, probably from an infection control point of view. But if you look at the stats in England alone, we're doing 300,000 blood tests per day. And if we're using one of those every single time, they're being thrown away. So rather than reusing, we're thrown away. So looking at practice and how practice is contributing to plastic waste is a big thing we need to look at. Next slide, please. So as Neil mentioned, we did a piece of work with the Northwest. It's about 30, it's 24 NHS organisations, a few more in total, but we didn't quite get everybody that participated. Over £500 million of spend. And a lot of that spend is actually bought through our national wholesaler in England, so an organisation called NHS Supply Chain. In total, there's about 250,000 products covering over 8,000 suppliers. And what we did is we took order line detailed data from every single organisation. We then spent time working through that data through a number of different mechanisms, but trying to identify what contained plastic, whether it was single use or not, and then the weight of each item. So as you can imagine, things come in boxes, some things come in pallets and crates, something comes in eaches, and we try to get back a bit like a supermarket does, is get back to a kind of a price per each and a weight per each. So we could start to understand across the region what the weight of plastic was being used across the top 100 items. So we've not looked across everything yet, but we're prioritizing the big areas where we are disposing and using a lot of plastic. So if you go to the next slide, please. So this just gives you an example. In the Northwest, it breaks out into 3 regions. We've got Greater Manchester, Cheshire and Merseyside and Lancashire. And overall, you can see the little graph that's built in the bigger graph. It is reducing ever so slightly the use of plastic. This was during 1920, so it doesn't include what we would probably now refer to as the COVID year of 2021, where the usage is very different. So this is more of a typical year pre-COVID. And we can now track the movement over time of those top 100 items and the amount of weight of plastic that's being used. Next slide, please. So this shows you, we've removed the supplier names because we didn't want to put them up on here, but the work in the Northwest kind of highlighted who these suppliers were. So what you're looking at on the graph here is the spend across the axes at the bottom. We've got the number of eaches, so the number of items bought up the left, and then the size of circle is the weight of plastic, being used, single-use plastic, across the Northwest in 1920, the top 100 items only. So you can see a handful of suppliers working with those suppliers would actually cover off a lot of the usage very quickly. Next slide, please. When we look at what it is, so what is it that we're using when you look across those top 100 items? Syringes are a big part of it. There's lots of lab and pathology equipment. Thermometers appears quite high. It's not necessarily large weight, but we do get through a lot of thermometers, and they're the little plastic tips that go in your ear and just get thrown away at the end of each usage. There's a lot of plastic going out that way as well. And things like plastic bags and sacks, aprons, dressings, various bits and pieces and products that contain plastic. And these are only the products that contain predominantly plastic. So we had to be really clear in the analysis that lots of products contain a mixture of different materials. What we did on this is where we focused on where more than 50% of the product was plastic, just to make it as clear as possible, so the majority. Next, please. And then just looking at where that then is split out across organisations. So Greater Manchester has fewer organisations, so naturally it's going to look like there's more plastic being used. They've got some super large hospitals in Greater Manchester, whereas some of the other regions it's more split out, so they don't feature as highly. But now we can track plastic by weight across the 24 organisations, and going forwards track that over time, so we can start to see how change in practice reduces plastic. But also for Neil's point of view and his team, they can now start to understand what those products are, which we never really had visibility of before, and then work either internally with clinical teams to change practice if that's possible, or actually work with the supply base to understand what alternative materials are out there. One of the other areas we've not looked at yet, but is a big component to this, is actually the packaging that these products come in. Packaging contributes a large amount to kind of disposable, and if it's cardboard, fair enough, we can recycle it, but if there's plastic in there, things have to be kept sterilized. All those different parts feed into it. Next slide, I think that was, yeah, last one. So this is also in England. We have something we call the Category Tower Programme, part of NHS Supply Chain. There are a number of towers that source products on behalf of English NHS trusts. And there is a big push to push more and more products through that service. So what this is just doing is looking at how the towers which tower providers do the Northwest need to talk to understand how they can reduce plastic. And Tower 1, you can see up there, IV therapy is probably the largest in terms of volume of plastic and the actual number of plastic items. So that kind of gives you a flavour for the work we've done. There's a lot more work behind the scenes. There's a lot more work that Neil's now working on to take it forwards. But we've taken the first step in trying to understand what plastic's being used, how much are we using, and then starting to target, can we actually reduce the amount of plastic. So at that point, I'm going to stop and I'm going to hand over to James to finish off the presentation.
Thank you, Matt and Neil. So I'm just going to take this back up a stage, really, to a higher level. So as Neil outlined, at the moment there's real momentum growing on the impact that we're having on the environment, climate change, and ultimately the health of the world's population. And we're seeing that with obviously leading activists such as Greta Thunberg, but also I think there's a real momentum now within the population that time is now for real action. So if you'd like to click on the next slide, please. So the NHS has responded to this in quite a big way. So the gentleman there pictured was the CEO of NHS England till very, very recently, a gentleman called Sir Simon Stevens. So despite the pandemic last year and obviously the major impact that had not only on the UK but also on the globe, there was an initiative that has been launched called NHS Net Zero. And Sir Simon Stevens is backed this to the hill and actually put his name to this initiative because it's felt that to actually duck this big challenge, particularly at this moment in time, was probably not the right thing to do, because the impact of not tackling the UK's carbon footprint could be significantly higher in terms of the impact on lives than the actual pandemic itself. So the NHS Net Zero was launched last year, as I say, late last year, with the real aim to have the NHS being the first net zero health system globally by 2040. So you can click on the next slide, please. So the call to action, and I can share a link. I'll get Elisa to share a link to the document, which is publicly available and goes through a lot of what we're talking through today. But the real benefits as to why we're doing this is the research that's been carried out indicates that over 150,000 lives could be saved per year through better air quality and generally a better focus really on a healthy society. And as Neil outlined, the NHS itself contributes over 4% to the overall UK national carbon footprint. And I think as one of the world's largest polluters, I think by head of population, that's a fairly significant impact that the NHS actually does have on the health of the world. So it does need to be tackled. Now, there are 3 levels of carbon emissions that we're actively looking at tackling, measuring, and indeed addressing. And the first one is the scope 1 and 2 carbon emissions, which the NHS has been actively tracking for quite a few years now. But the big challenge is what is called scope 3 carbon emissions, and this is the supply chain. And the reason why this is really key is of the 4% of the UK's total carbon emissions generated by the NHS, 90% of this is actually generated from the supply chain itself, which really then does lead itself to a major need to tackle the issue at hand. So the UK is hosting UN climate change negotiations this year. And net zero, as Neil mentioned, is aimed to be by 2040. So again, that seems a long way off, but there's some significant actions that need to be taken, the decisions that need to be made and are actually being made now to really address this initiative. And with a 80% reduction target by 2028, we're going to start seeing some fairly radical decisions that I think are going to be made from a procurement perspective to really address some of these challenges. And one of the things that is actually happening with the structure of the NHS at the moment is they're actually working on a regional basis moving forward, using what we call an ICS strategy. And this will mean that regions such as the Northwest will be collaborating on some real strategic initiatives to drive down the carbon footprints of that particular region. And this is something that obviously Neil and Matt are going to be heavily involved in. Now, as I say, significant action needs to be taken, and we'll go through what we're actually doing to help address that at the moment. But suppliers, as I think Dieter mentioned earlier on, are going to have to start looking at this as well and start pulling together their plans and actions as to how they're going to support the healthcare system, particularly in the NHS at this moment in time, in reducing their carbon footprint. Next slide, please. So this is just taken from the NHS Net Zero document, which again we'll make available. So scope 1, as we discussed, is direct emissions, either from our owned or directly controlled sources on site. And scope 2 is indirect emissions from energy, mostly electricity in the NHS's case. As I say, the remaining 90% of the carbon footprint is from scope 3. So if we move on to the next slide, please. So what we're actually doing is we are working with organisations to extract their purchase order and accounts payable and supplier information and actually measure their scope 3 carbon footprint of their supply chain. And what we then do is we then make that data available to the business intelligence solutions that are actually deployed within that trust or in an actual region as well. And what this does, it highlights, similar to the single-use plastics information that Matt was discussing, the outline and the quick wins. So where there can be some significant changes to the carbon footprint of a particular region or an individual organisation through simple changes in process, alternative supply, or indeed looking at more strategic initiatives, so buying locally or consolidating procurement and procurement distribution activities on a regional level. So what we do is we work with, as I say, organisations to generate and calculate their scope 3 carbon, present that back to individuals within the organisation who can then make informed decisions on how they can then reduce the carbon footprint over time. So the benefits, I think, are clear to reducing carbon footprint. Obviously, the impact on the healthcare of the local and global population. But there's also other benefits as well that I believe are really significant. I think the cultural benefits within an organisation and actually bringing together clinical staff, procurement individuals, and also just individuals on the ground who really do want to make an impact on the environment. And in the main, then, the activities that they undertake will all scale up to actually have a significant impact on the carbon footprint of an NHS trust. But also, we are also seeing that there's significant savings from a financial perspective that can be made as well through basically changing people's behaviours, making them actually aware of what they're buying, the impact it has on the environment, does simple things like reduces their demand and the amount of products that they're actually consuming, but also makes them look at alternative ways and suggestions as to how they can actually improve things moving forward. So as I say, there's the impact on health, there's the financial benefits, but there's also those social responsibility and sustainability benefits that we're seeing amongst staff at all levels within an organisation. So we are working with one or two ICSs at the moment on actually implementing solutions to drive down scope 3, and I'm sure that we'll be able to persuade Dieter and Elisa to give you an update as to how those are progressing over the next few months, as and when we start seeing the results coming through. But I'd like to thank you all for your time today, and if you've got any questions for any of us, then feel free to ask through the chat or at the end of the session. Thank you. Perfect.
Yeah, thank you guys. Sorry, I'm struggling a bit with the technical equipment here. Give me a second, Simon. So I try to switch on my camera. Wait a bit. So yeah, now it works. Sorry. Thank you guys. Very, very impressive. When I heard the first time about this net zero program from James, I was deeply impressed. As far as I know, the NHS in Europe is by far the absolute pioneer in this. Yeah. And we as Healthsprout Europe have a good overview in the European hospital scenery. Yeah. Thank you also, guys, for these very practical insights. I guess this is exactly what the buyers, what the procurers need a practical toolkit on how to implement this in the hospital. And this example shows also how small scale and laborious it is, and how long this journey will take. Okay, guys, that guides me direct to Simon. Yeah? With Integrity Next, he also wants to provide buyers with a practical toolkit, with a practical, from my point of view, very, very good, very, very impressive database to answer future questions about the sustainability of the supply chain. Simon is co-founder of Integrity Next, and he's in the, to be honest, a shooting star with his company in the field of digital procurement tools. He's winning awards one by the other at that time. Okay, it seems Simon's had the right business idea at the right time. Simon, I want to hand over to you. Go ahead, please.
Dieter, thank you. That was a little bit too much of an honor. And thank you again, and Matt and James. I think it was really impressive also looking into these numbers. I mean, as Dieter said, my name is Simon Yannick. I'm responsible for sales and partner management at Integrity Next. And Integrity Next is a technology company. We provide a worldwide platform to help organizations to monitor their suppliers, right? And Matt, Neil, and James, I mean, you guys have outlined it. You know, it's all about external value generation. You know, in most organizations, 90% of the scope 3, as you, James, said, is related to suppliers, to external kind of emissions. The entire impact on plastics is also highly linked to the supplier relations. So Integrity Next is the platform, is one of the leading platforms in the world for managing suppliers, for understanding the sustainability impact of suppliers on a global perspective. We have around 100 large customers, large enterprise customers. We monitor around 750,000 suppliers on a continuous basis with regards to all major sustainability topics. We are operated in more than 160 countries in the world. We scan roughly 1 billion messages per day to also identify if any kind of the suppliers, the healthcare organizations or the medtech companies are dealing with, are associated with bad press, with bad environmental practices. We cover more than 20 sustainability topics. I mean, we heard some of them already. We have plastics, we have environmental standards, we have carbon emissions. I'll touch base on that in a few seconds in more details. And we're used in 160 countries in the world. We are basically delivered from a platform perspective in 11 languages, ready to run. So every organization can immediately start using Integrity Next and monitor their suppliers on all major practices with regards to sustainability topics. Now, looking to the next slide, we are among the largest platform providers from a procurement perspective that solely looking into sustainability requirements. We are working with some of the largest medtech organizations in the world. We work with Dräger, we work with Fresenius Medical Care, we work with medium-sized organizations such as Schreiner Medipharm. We work with hospitals, with university hospitals to help them to get better visibility into their suppliers. One of the great examples of our hospital and healthcare provider case studies is, for example, Hospital Kantonsspital Winterthur. It's in Switzerland. It's one of the top 10 leading Swiss hospitals, and they are using Integrity Next to manage their suppliers. They're having a revenue of close to €500 million. They have 40 million of spend only with their direct and key suppliers. They have around 455 important key strategic suppliers, and they're using Integrity Next to really gain visibility into the sustainability performance of their suppliers. And they have their entire direct spend under management in the Integrity Next system. They have 98% supplier response rates on critical sustainability surveys that we do perform on the Integrity Next platform with the suppliers to understand what are their standards and practices. And I will touch base in the next few minutes on how we help organizations, why this topic is so relevant from the different angles of drivers. And we show you how our solution can help you with a proven kind of process approach to leverage the same kind of success as we've implemented from many other organizations in the healthcare medtech industry. So on to the next slide, please. I mean, what we've seen is, and thanks for the presentation from Neil and James and Matt. So we've seen that there is a tremendous increasing regulatory framework in many countries in the European Union, but also outside the European Union. That means we have certain legislations to come up on a European basis, such as the Supply Chain Act, that drives organizations and forces organizations in the healthcare industry to address the entire topic of sustainability in a more detailed way by also looking into their suppliers as they've done in the past. And I mean, we heard it from the numbers in the previous presentation. So, I mean, the healthcare industry has a higher impact on the climate crisis than the entire flight industry or the shipping industry, and the vessels industry, and that is massive. You know, every airplane that is flying around is more likely less having a negative impact onto the global climate crisis than the entire healthcare system. So, and that is interesting to see, because we do have a lot focus on the healthcare industry at the moment due to the COVID situation, but I think not so many people are actually aware of how big and important the healthcare industry is. And that is good that it is big, but it's also important to address these vital negative aspects the healthcare industry might have with regards to sustainability on a global perspective. And we do have the other major drivers, right? I mean, we have the consumers who are more aware and more sensitive on the way how organizations are behaving. And it also means individuals are more and more recognizing what kind of waste more likely is, for example, been happening around them if they are in a healthcare environment. It's just something we are more sensitive of as individuals, as human beings on this planet. So it's also a kind of, it's an image driver. It's a reputational threat for hospitals, for the healthcare industry, to not address this kind of sensitiveness of the end consumers. We also see that many insurance companies, also have from their investors the pressures to focus more on sustainability practices, which actually leads to kind of indirect pressures towards healthcare providers to be more focused around sustainability, also with regards to their suppliers. And we see also the different type of investors, being it the governmental-owned hospitals, where more likely from a local and legislation perspective, the restrictions become more relevant to focus on sustainability, or being the publicly listed organizations to attract external capital. Investor relations more and more demand a stronger focus on sustainability practices from the healthcare industry and its associated medtech and key suppliers. Now, looking into the next slide, what is quite critical is that we heard in the previous presentation, looking into the Northwest statistics, we are having like roughly $500 million of pound spend, but we're having 7,800 suppliers. And yes, we are all aware that we have a pretty strong and key supplier focus centric kind of set of supplier relations in most in most hospitals. Yeah, so we can nearly knock it down to a few hundreds of key strategic suppliers for most probably the large amount of healthcare providers. But we also have these large amounts of smaller suppliers, service providers, that become more relevant and become more also get into the attention of health sustainability requirements from a regulatory perspective. Looking into the Supply Chain Act that is discussed on a European level, organizations then will be forced to look into every entity they're having a contract with, they're purchasing things of. And that will also include the food supplies. That will also include the service, the cleaning, the external cleaning services you're having as part of the relevant maintenances and cleaning services in your hospitals. So organizations need to become more prepared to look into a few hundred, few thousands of suppliers on average per each healthcare organization, and look into these smaller suppliers as well to really be able to reduce the own negative impact. And that's what we as Integrity Next are specialized on. We help organizations, as you can see on the next slide, to really focus not just on these key top suppliers. Yes, we are looking in them as well, but we're also helping the organizations to scale up into this large amount of suppliers that is typically under the waterline, and in most calculations not even seen as a kind of negative aspect, but it has a huge impact from an environmental perspective. Now, Integrity Next is a platform. It's a technology platform. We offer on our platform a huge variety of topics. So we cover all major environmental, social, and governance topics on our platform. So organizations, healthcare providers, medtech companies can screen thousands of suppliers on environmental practices, on their human rights and labor standards, on their health and safety standards. We do have an own entire module focusing on carbon emissions to use our platform, use the crowd intelligence we have with the suppliers, and gather data to feed it in such deep analytics projects like James has outlined it, where we provide the data on where are the carbon emissions basically happening, and what kind of suppliers and what kind of material groups, to drill deeper and understand where to drive action, where to drive reduction processes, and reduce the negative environmental impact the own organization have. The Integrity Next platform has two major components, right? In the first component, we focus really on data gathering. We are one of the largest platforms in the world with 750,000 suppliers, a lot of them in the medtech industry, a lot of them in the healthcare industry, where we analyze and understand what's the state of work of the organizations, where are they with their standards and processes, what kind of certifications do they have, how do they meet the required standards, what kind of emissions do they have. So we gather all this information, we validate information, and we provide it to our customers so that they can exactly see where in their supplier relations, in their supply chains, they might have problems, they might have negative impacts from the supplier, from the external value generation perspective. And then we have a second major component which we use to really monitor roughly 1 billion messages per day to understand which of the suppliers I'm actually receiving goods from, receiving services from, is actually in the news, for example, because of negative behaviors, because of bad practices with regards to environmental damages, also social or unsocial behavior with regards to their labor forces and so on. And we monitor these informations, we feed it as a kind of risk alert in the dashboards and into the inboxes of our customers' purchasing departments, so that they understand where are some of the black sheep that we might have to have a look at and understand, and potentially remove them as strategic suppliers from the platform itself, or from the relationship. Then I think what many organizations also need to understand is a lot what they do is important from an external value generation perspective. So it is also something you need to do all these aspects from a risk perspective. You need to do that from a standard perspective to understand where do I start my initiatives. but it's also about talking about it. It is about, as Jens said it, talking about the ambitions, and also being more likely communicatable and being publicly responsible, and also showing externally what are the goals, how do you want to achieve them. And so we partnered with the GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative. That's the global standard for non-financial reporting. So anything Integrity Next does is also automatically transferred into non-financial reports that again can then be used in the external communication. And even if you're a small hospital, even if you are a smaller healthcare provider, it will make a difference if you talk about what you do. It will talk about the transparency that you have also towards your customers, your patients, and you can use it for your own reputational benefits in a way to talk about your ambitions that you're on as a kind of journey perspective. So that's something I always urge organizations. We as Integrity Next, we extract from our platform more than 90 plus supplier related KPIs based on the GRI standard, as you can see on the next slide, that are focused around the environmental and the social impacts of healthcare providers, of medtech organizations, so they're readily be used for you for your external communication. And going to the next slide, I think it is really about a proven and successful project approach. So we run with every of our customers, we run through an initial kind of 4 to 6 week project, and after these 4 to 6 weeks, we typically have 82% of data available for all their suppliers in their campaign. And that could mean that within a really short period, you have the first major success as a kind of database is available, and then you can start drilling into the details and understand with us together to really find out where would I need to now look into more details, where would I need to have the largest negative impacts, where can I start now with my projects to reduce, where are the suppliers that I potentially need to develop or exclude from my further supplier relations. And we work in a strong partner ecosystem. I think that's really important. We have standard integrations, as you can see on the next slide. We are a Gartner Cool vendor with regards to supplier management, supplier sustainability management. We're a ready to run platform. We work with many system integrators. We integrate into the SAP, into the procurement systems. We help the organizations to drive the standards to support the United Nations Global Compact. Many organizations now start to formulate goals around the Sustainable Development Goals. So we help them to drive these agendas, and we work with the standard setters such as the RMI, the GRI, and many other organizations to really drive sustainability in the supply chain. So I urge you, reach out to us, and we can explain you how we drive sustainability in the supply chain. And that's my call to action: drive sustainability in the healthcare supply chain with us, and reach out if you have any questions. Thank you for your time, thank you for the attention, and looking forward to the Q&A session now.
Well, thank you, Simon. That was amazing to also see it from that part. And I'm very proud and happy actually that we as HealthProc Europe are able to build with the experience from the UK and the NHS Net Zero projects together also with Integrity Next, actually a step further, co-creating of what sustainability means in the healthcare procurement path. So thank you here as well for that opportunity to actually, as you say, walk the talk and make it happen. And this is currently what we're working on, and we're happy also to post you and keep you updated on our next future advancement and achievement of what is coming up. So I do have received a question, and then I would also motivate you further to ask your questions from the audience, and then Simon will moderate the Q&A. I would quickly like to drop in one question I have received, and that goes to the NHS experts, because there was a question in regards to, do you know about reward examples or rewarding schemes of companies in the NHS to impact the single use of plastic? anyone who can take that one? Neil, Matt, or James?
Yeah, I'm not sure what we mean by rewarding schemes. Is that in the contract or a system where they get paid when we return things?
That is my personal interpretation. I would say it is about the incentives of how to actually change the way to become more sustainable and actually reduce a single use of plastic. I would interpret it.
So I think there are more examples now. So we are seeing examples of suppliers who are encouraging reuse. So actually, where things have been single use in the past, we can now actually send them back, have them re-sterilized, remanufactured, and then that's used again for a second time or a third time. So I think that's one area. We're also seeing some upcycling or recycling as well. So there is now technology in the market where we can recycle, for example, surgical masks and make those into plastic blocks, which can be used for things like furniture and tiling. There's a great example in Greater Manchester with my favourite football team, Manchester City, where they are upcycling football shirts. So these football, and this is a great example of not only environmental impact but also social value as well. So these football shirts, which are used by the club, are then sent to a local prison service who have a sewing business. They then have to cut the shirts. They put studs in them so you can access them through the sides, and they are the surgical gowns which are used in our local children's hospital. So a child going in the past who would have had a very boring surgical gown now gets a football shirt which is made for that purpose. So I think that's an example of where we can start to look at doing things a bit different, bringing in innovation, not thinking things have to be single use. Is there an alternate use?
I also think as well, and there's another part that have been introduced by Dieter and Lisa too, where the actual tender award criteria I think will be changed over the next few years, so that as a supplier, if you're demonstrating that you are the impact that your products and services have on the carbon footprint of that healthcare system will be reduced through reusable plastics or different ways of working that reduces the carbon footprint, I think you will have a better chance of winning that particular contract. That's I think is going to be reflected over the next few months. I know there is a project underway looking at the tender award criteria around sustainability at the moment.
I can confirm that from a European perspective. We as HealthProc Europe has a more or less good relations to the EU legislative, and of course at the moment the EU decided the Green Deal, and in the near future this legislation will adopted by the national countries, and there's a huge part for it in that. For the future, they will change the award criteria, especially for public hospital. Public hospital are obliged to make public tenders, and in the future, this will play a major role. The carbon footprint, anti-bribery. Of course, they start at low key beginning, but there's no other way to reach that we achieve these very ambitious climate goals. Yeah.
Good, perfect. So we received quite a lot of questions, and I just wanted to highlight that if we are not able to answer all of them, we will definitely answer them afterwards. So every panelist in this round will receive then the questions addressed to him, and then we will basically also answer the remaining questions at the end. But I would now more likely just look into the list of questions, and I would just choose some of the questions for all of the panelists and walk through these questions. I think it's a super interesting topic as we can see from the various questions. So let's jump into the audience questions. We have one major question coming towards Jens. So So Jens is basically asked with regards to the pressure. So where's the pressure coming from? Is the private equity investor pushing towards sustainability? The person says, as I know that EG BlackRock is doing this for their investments as well. So more the question, where is the largest pressure coming from?
Unfortunately, sorry, Jens has to leave this session. Yeah, but Jens promised he will all answer the questions from this perspective, and nobody, please forward this question to Jens, and I'm sure he will answer these questions. From my perspective, you know, I'm not the press speaker of Median. Of course, the private equity make a lot of pressure. We as HealthProc Europe has also a lot of good contact to private equity, healthcare investors, and they make a lot of pressure. They make big pressure. Hey, come on, that's the same as in other fields. Yeah, you know, one of the biggest, not one of the biggest, the biggest private investor, BlackRock, yeah, makes also pressure to his investments, and of course, and also in the healthcare field, they are pushing very hard in that field.
Good. Then I have a question to Matt Oram, which asks, reduce single-use plastics is kind of hard when it comes to pharmaceuticals and IV, as I would think it needs to go in waste incineration for safety reasons. Glass would be the worst alternative due to thermal heat needed, correct? What are your thoughts?
Interesting one. Yeah, I mean, we tend not to get involved too much with medicines. We tend to focus as a business anyway more on the clinical products. But I guess the same thing applies, and that is the biggest challenge, I think. When we started to look through the list of products, you start to scratch your head a little bit and think, well, what is the equivalent? What else could you use that doesn't require plastic, as you've just alluded to there? Moving to glass and glass smashing and all the challenges that go with that is not an option. So, I mean, I don't know this world too well, but in the actual materials that are used to manufacture these products, and actually are there alternative products that do degrade quicker? Because you're right, the alternative is you send them to incineration, and that's not great either. So I do think that is probably one of the biggest challenges, is we've identified these products. What are the equivalents? What else could you either use as a product, or what alternative method could you use to drive the same clinical outcome without actually using those products in the first place? And I just think that is the biggest challenge.
Yeah, I mean, just to add on the back of that, I think we have to be realistic. I don't, you know, we've got this top 100, and I know we will not be able to, you know, to reduce everything in that top 100 or replace it with something else. But this is, you know, this is part of the process. Until we know what that top 100 is, we can't do that exercise to go through and work out what we can influence and change and what we can't. And it might be in some cases, you know, it will always be single-use plastic, and we have to look at, you know, these other things we can look at the packaging, the waste stream afterwards. But we also know there are other things on the list where there are alternatives. So, for example, plastic bowls, they could be paper pulp type products. Are we using far too many of certain items? So, for example, examination gloves is a really good example. Some really good work done to Great Ormond Street Hospital in London, where they've done, you know, in advance of COVID, they did a really good educational piece, and they saw a massive reduction in the use of gloves, just because people were wearing gloves and taking gloves when they didn't really need to. So I think this is, you know, this has to be looked at as a wider program. You know, what is it that we can change or swap? What can we actually reduce? Is there better reuse or recycling? So I think we have to look at sort of all those options internally.
I think you're right, Neil. I think there's also where you can't swap certain products for clinical reasons or any other reason. It's the only product available. You can also look at offsetting that carbon impact by reducing your impact in other initiatives within the trust or within the ICS that can actually, you know, pick off the low-hanging fruit. I don't really like that term, but I'll use it in this case. That can really drive the organisation forward and say offset the the impact of those single-use plastic products that you can't swap out at this moment in time.
Yeah, and a really simple example of that we're looking at the moment is around order rationalization. So, you know, if a hospital is ordering things every day or every few days, can we actually change that internal process so they're only ordering once a week, so they get a bigger order, which obviously has a lower carbon footprint overall. But then we've got to look at, does that mean that in the hospital that they need a bigger storage room? So it's starting to look at, you know, some of those payoffs and some of those equations.
Good. Then we have two questions to Integrity Next. So myself, one question is how does our business model work? Basically, we're a SaaS platform, so that means you just have to literally pay a yearly fee to use the platform, to access the data. That's basically it. There is no one-off fees, no service-related fees. It's just a yearly license fee that is basically based on the amount of users actively working on the Integrity Next system, and that means your own company users and not the supplier users. They don't pay anything, the supplier users. It's you pay a kind of lock-in fee to use the platform and monitor your suppliers. So it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward, and that is based on the amount of users you're actually using the platform with on a daily basis. Then second small question, is it available in French? Yes, it's completely available in French, entirely available. So that's one of our key questions. Then we have a question, I think, back into the round, Neil, Matt, and James. Someone is asking, will you be using LCAs to understand whether a single-use plastic is better or worse than the alternative?
Yeah, so I think life cycle analysis is key, and we've already done one project around that at a bit of a superficial level, but looking at single-use gowns compared with reusable gowns, and you know, it does actually show that there is a cost saving and an environmental saving, we think, on using a reusable gown as opposed to a single-use gown. So yes, I think although it's going to be quite a lot of work, I think that's the only way we're going to address some of the product issues.
Okay. Good. So we are in the last minutes. So I would like to hand back to Dieter and Elisa, and basically thank from my side for the attendance. As said, I mean, regarding any open questions, we will come back directly to you and then answer every question that was asked to us also in the meantime and also during the webinar. So yeah, thanks for organizing, Dieter. Heading back to you and Elisa for some closing words, and yeah, from my side, I'm wishing you a nice weekend already up front, and was a pleasure to be part of that webinar.
Thank you, Simon. Also from our end, well, thanks for all the speakers for having shared here your insights, your experiences, and especially from my point of view, making sustainability something much more practical, and starting off in showcasing your activities to see the reality behind it and come from a very meta level way of looking into sustainability and net zero ambitions into something very concrete. So from our point of view, thanks a lot for being here with us. Also, thanks to the audience for being so engaged and sharing your questions. As I mentioned in the beginning, we will be sharing the recording as well as the slides with you in the beginning of next week, and we're very much forward looking to also engage with you in terms of HealthProc Europe to co-create sustainability projects together with our community and partners, because we can see the importance and the impact on healthcare health, and especially with our ambition to make procurers the game changers in the area of sustainability. This is for us the way to go. Dieter, I'm heading over to you for a couple of closing words.
Perfectly, Elisa. As already known. Thank you very much all, and have a great weekend.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.